Okay, so you've probably needed to solve a question like this, where you are asked to simplify the square root of negative 128. Okay, so before we do this, let's do one a little simpler, and then we'll come back to this. Okay, so let's start nice and easy. So we all know the square root of 36, positive 36, is 6, right? So the square root of negative 36 is just negative 6, right? Well, let's think about that. Because a common thing you'll do is, oh, well, it's negative 6, right? Well, no. Because when I square negative 6, a negative 6 times a negative 6 actually just becomes positive 36. So we need to use what are called imaginary numbers to simplify this. Okay? So imaginary numbers, I don't want to get too into this. If just look at Wikipedia if you care. It gets kind of crazy. Imaginary numbers are very much real. Okay, and the imaginary number I, so I, that's just the square root of negative 1. So anytime you have the square root of negative 1, it's equal to I. Okay, and imaginary numbers can form complex numbers. They can just be imaginary. But that's not really the point of this video. So just know this is true, and this will always be true. Let's use that to solve this question. So what you want to do is get the negative 1 under the radical out, and then just simplify the rest like you normally would. So the square root of negative 36, well, you'd probably agree with the negative 1, which is what we're trying to look for. Negative 1 times 36 is negative 36, right? So these are equivalent. Okay. Now, this is the same as the square root of 1, negative 1, rather, times the square root of 36. Okay. You can always break up a root like that. Well, we know the square root of negative 1 is just I. So this is just I times the square root of 36, which is 6. Now, one thing we usually do is we like to have, when there is an imaginary number, we like to put that I on the right side of the number for some reason, okay? That's just kind of the notation. So we would call it 6I. The answer is 6I. All right. What this means is 6I squared is equal to negative 36. Okay, that is what we are saying. Okay, so let's move on to this one. All right, so it's the same idea, except it's going to be a little more difficult because the square root of 128 is not it's not one that's perfect, but it's made up of a perfect square. So what are the perfect squares? Remember, we have like, well, 2 squared is 4. You got 3 squared, 9. Keep going. Like 10 squared is 100. Keep going. And so on and so forth. If you don't remember them all, sometimes it's helpful to have a little cheat sheet like this. Okay, feel free to pause it here. So we look at 128. I don't see it. I see 121, 144. So I don't see 128 on here. But 128 is just 64 times 2. So we can break up 128 into 64 times 2, right? So let's do that. So let's break this up. This is equal to the square root of, well, let's take that negative 1 out. And then let's just start by taking the 128 out. But remember, remember we can break this up. The square root of negative 1 times the square root of, well, 64 times 2 is just 128. So we'll break this down to 64. and have another one that's 2. Okay. This is just going to be I times the square root of 64 is 8. And we can't reduce the square root of 2. The square root of 2 is irrational. I mean, you can try to find it. Good luck. Now, this is technically right, but we like to rewrite these things with typically imaginary components last. We like to stick the perfect square roots out front, okay, and then we like to put the roots in the middle. Don't ask me why. This is technically correct, but usually you'll see this as 8 times the square root of 2, I. Okay, that is what you typically write it as, but this is technically correct as is. Okay, and that's all we have for today. Hopefully that's helpful. And if you have any questions, you can always ask your Eudora High School math teacher.